Welcome back to another video by Conditioning. Today we're looking at 8 things missing from your software engineering or even production engineering interview prep plan. So if you're going for tech, production engineer or software engineering roles, this video is for you, especially if you're aiming for big tech, so the competitive firms, obviously not limited to this list. I guarantee that you're going to learn at least one thing. I actually bet it's going to be more than one that'll actually level up your game and get you interview ready objectively. I actually say 8 here, but it's actually 20 give or take. But what I've done is simplify things and categorize them into 8 so that it's easy for you to digest and apply them. The first key insight today, and it's actually not even counting the 8 I mentioned earlier, is I'm sure you've heard of this saying, practice makes perfect. However, there is a big difference. Let's think about a programmer. When you're coding under pressure with multiple interviewers, watching your every move, judging your every statement under that pressure cooker conditions where the stakes are high, you make a mistake and consequences are quite dire, versus programming, coding, or solving problems in the comfort of your home. There's a huge difference. So first thing is, if we're even going to summarize the strategy, it's realistic practice makes perfect, or you could say practice under realistic conditions. That's what makes perfect. So if you're not doing that, this is something that's going to just improve things for you by an order of magnitude. Question for you: what does it mean to be interview ready in an objective way? Or another way to put it is, how do you know when you're interview ready so you don't go and waste the opportunity? For example, if you're a pilot learning to fly, we wouldn't want to let pilots start flying planes if they were not objectively ready, because obviously bad things happen. Well, having had a lot of experience with interviewing on the conditioning platform and just being in the industry for over 10 years, so being an interviewer and doing loads of interviews myself, I've compiled this list of things that if you have all of this, the only reason you fail interviews is because of bad luck. And that's the only reason why you fail, because of factors out of your control. Maybe you were an interview, you got to the final round, there are 2 candidates left, and maybe one candidate's the son of some high ranking officer in that company and they have nepotism. Okay, there's nothing you can do about that. Or the other candidate just happened to have worked on the exact same tech stack and maybe knew 2 members of the team who referred him or her. So even though you passed, they were like, you know what, we're just going to choose the person who was referred by 2 people and worked on the exact same tech stack. So there's some situations where there's literally nothing you can do. But in terms of everything in your control, these are the things that you need to sort out and make sure you have to make sure that these things are second nature to you. So we're going to go through them, but in a simplified version, as I promised. So let's dive into some of these 2 very quickly. So the first one says real-time information processing. If you've ever interviewed with Google, you know their interviewing style is a bit different, and there's a lot of interaction with the interviewer, and they can change constraints, they can introduce new information. You can have a problem broken down into multiple sub-problems, and they keep increasing difficulty by giving you information and hints. And the ability to actually process this information in real time, fairly quickly, accurately, and apply it and engage with that interviewer is really important. You don't get this skill from just solving problems on leak code. Another one is autopilot guard, which we'll come to. But as you can see, this is a very detailed list. Might be too difficult to digest. So let's try something different. I'm going to break down the required skills into 8 deadly sins. So I'm going to call it things you shouldn't do. And then we're going to talk about how you can overcome these things. That'll be a good way to deliver this. 8 deadly sins. First one is going in blind. We'll dive into that. What does that mean? Negligence, cognitive overload, sluggishness. You can already guess this has to do with speed. Recklessness. I'll talk about how some people gamble and things you can do to be more strategic and optimize your chances of making good decisions. There's overconfidence. There's recall failure, which has to do with forgetfulness. And there's cowardice. Overcoming all of these is like gathering all the infinity stones. It gives you superpowers. So let's go with the first one, negligence. So what do I mean? A perfect example of this is this situation, or this phenomenon I'll call autopilot. And a good analogy for this is this recent video I saw online where there was a guy, he basically got a Tesla self-driving car, right? Or it has this autopilot feature, and it had a wall on the road. And if you're the car and you look at the wall, it looks like the road is just continuing, but a human can actually tell that's actually not the road. But what happens is the car actually drove through and smashed through the wall. And there's an equivalent situation in interviews where you see a problem you've seen before. Maybe it's like 99%, 98% similar to something you saw before, but there's a subtlety. Some people don't notice the subtlety and just go off and solve the wrong problem, solve the problem seen before. Some people notice, but it's a bit too late. So the negligence side of things is not protecting yourself from this phenomenon, because it kind of has to do with how the brain works. It associates things. So if it sees things before, it remembers everything it's seen before, and there's a tendency to just it's almost like muscle memory, if you want to put it that way. Your body's almost just repeating things it's done before, right? So there's actually things you can do. I call them autopilot guards, things you can do to protect yourself from yourself, and from your clarification technique to using checklists to even skeleton code. I actually have a video already on my channel that covers this, so I'm going to put a link in the description. In fact, for all the other things we cover where there's a relevant video, I'll put a link in the description. So for now, let's just point out these issues and the techniques at a high level, and for the deep dive after the video, you can go to those links and check them out for whichever issues apply to you. So next thing, cognitive overload. And the way this tends to manifest is through brain freezes. And a lot of people must have had this experience where they're in an interview and there's a problem presented and they just freeze. The interview ends 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes later, everything's flowing to their mind. They know how they will solve it. The answer is very clear, or they have the optimal solution or whatever. What happened during the interview that got your brain to freeze? Why did you pack up? Why did your brain check out? One of the major causes of this is just this cognitive overload. Your brain is so overworked, or overwhelmed is a better word, due to the stressful condition. So there's a stress response going on. You're processing the interviewer's body language. You're trying to solve a problem. You're talking to the interview. You're doing so many things. Your brain is not used to that. Can't handle it, and then it just shuts down. So my recommendation is this idea of a separation of concerns as one strategy. Also, relaxation techniques, things you can do before and even during the interview. So taking things like chamomile tea. If you're a coffee drinker or you take caffeine in any form, L-theanine can help calm you down. Deep breathing exercises. You can actually do these during the interview. They can help reduce the stress response and help you be more present in the moment. There's also conditioning you can do. And, for example, mock interviews to get you used to these high pressure conditions. So the more realistic the mock, the better. Next on the list is recklessness. How can people or candidates be reckless in interviews? The analogy would be being in a car, driving on a highway, no seatbelt on. Right? Where there's loads of cars moving and anything can happen. There could be collisions and so on. And in an interview, it's high pressure. You typically have to do things very quickly. When you're operating at speed, you're more likely to make mistakes. And everybody understands that. I don't think anybody would disagree that when you're calm and relaxed versus when you're rushing or kind of moving at pace, it's obvious in which scenario you're more likely to make mistakes. You're rushing to leave the house. It's very easy to forget your keys and so on. That's why some people put their keys on the door and so on. Or things that they don't want to forget on the door. So, even if they're rushing and forget, once they're opening the door handle, they have to at least see or touch the thing that they're trying to remember, whether it's a key or something else, right? There's an equivalent of that with, say, for coding, for example, skeleton code. It's not pseudocode. It's just like if you think of a function, you have to implement a function. You put the interface and you have concise sentences that give a kind of step-by-step breakdown of how exactly your logic works. That way, when it comes to implementation, you just have to obey your skeleton, and the skeleton protects you from going in the wrong track. Also, as part of the skeleton, you input information such as key things that's very easy to forget, that's been given in the problem description or that the interviewer has mentioned. So it's almost like just there protecting you from going astray, even protecting you from autopilot as well. When you're about to implement the wrong algorithm because the problem is similar to something you've seen before, if you follow the skeleton guide, it protects you. if you're really advanced at this, you can even put your runtime complexities and so on. So in fact, what you can do as a strategy is you have your skeleton code, explain your approach using the skeleton code, explain the runtime complexity, and then once it's time to focus on implementation, you just implement. So not only does this protect you from going astray, but it also makes it easier to explain things, and also makes it easy to separate concerns and reduce cognitive load, because you can focus on laying out your approach, your algorithm, and explaining to an interviewer without thinking about syntax, without thinking about code. And then once it's time to implement, you can literally just focus on coding. It is easier for your brain to code and focus on coding, like let's say 100% or 99%, versus coding and talking at the same time. Yes, people say think out loud during an interview, explain your thought process. You can do that up front. Give your skeleton, explain your outline, put any information you need to protect yourself so you don't go astray. And once it's time to code, you're literally just implementing. You already explained to the interviewer. He or she knows what you're about to do. Just before we move on, I just want to point out that all these things we're covering are about getting you objectively ready for interviews in like an evidence-based way, so you can objectively know that yes, I'm ready, or no, I'm not ready, right? And you can think of the skills we're going through as being part of a checklist. So you can literally assess yourself and take these things. Mock interviews would also help you assess yourself, but yeah, you have a basis of doing that assessment. And this coming from doing over 1,000 interviews, mock interviews, and also interviewing experience I've done in FANG Plus companies over the past 10 plus years. Obviously, I do interviews on codishing.com and coaching. I'll talk more about that later, but these are really important, and I've seen that the candidates who excel have these things. So we make sure that before we tell a candidate they're interview ready, they tick all these boxes. So if you're enjoying what we've provided so far, do like, share, subscribe. Seriously, subscribe. It really helps the channel grow, helps us reach more people, and encourages us to continue doing what we're doing. The next one is sluggishness. It kind of has to do with speed, but let me make it very clear exactly what it means. So there's a need for speed in interviews. I think everybody knows that, because a lot of people have probably had an experience where they ran out of time. But how do you overcome this speed challenges, like this constraint? Like some interviews, for example, with Meta, they're probably the most time constrained. So how do you get good at managing time? One is time allocation by phase. So if we use coding as an example, you can break it down, like solving the problem into phases. There's the understanding and clarifying your understanding phase. There's the implementation phase. There's this dry run phase. And of course, there's also in between that, you're explaining and communicating with the interviewer. So whilst you solve problems, at home, mock interviews, whatever you're doing, you should allocate time to each of these. Say, okay, I'm going to spend 5 minutes understanding. I'm going to spend 10 minutes implementing, yada, yada, yada. And obviously you adapt this time allocation based on how much time you have an interview. So if you're doing like Meta and you have 2 questions, 35 minutes, really you want to be able to, on average, do each question in 17.5 minutes. Some questions you should be able to do in 5, so that saves you time for the other question, things like that, right? And you want to get to the point where you can do things reflexively. So whenever you do things and you have to like consciously think about things, that is much slower than things happening reflexively in terms of thought. The speed of thought is faster than the speed of, let me step back. The speed of unconscious thought, reflexive thought, is faster than the speed of conscious thought, right? When you're riding a bike, you're not thinking, oh, I need to, hit the left pedal, then the right pedal, then steer. That's just happening so fast. Your body's doing so quickly. Obviously, there's thoughts happening and muscle movements, but that's happening so quickly. That's what you want to get to in terms of your level of understanding of things, in particular, how fast you recall and apply them and recognize patterns. You want things to be reflexive. And because you're doing things at speed, don't forget the autopilot safeguards we mentioned. Really important. Another common sin I've seen candidates perform in interviews is this idea of going in blind. So example, they'll start coding an algorithm without even thinking about what the solution they're going to use is, or if it's correct, or thinking about the edge cases. Sometimes they don't even know how much time they have for the interview or how many questions are going to be asked. So they're just going in blind. I want you guys to look before you leap. You want to be a bit more strategic. I'll give you some examples. So the first one I have here is peeking. You can, if you're in an interview and you don't even know how many questions you're going to have, right? So for example, with Meta, you're going to get 2. Sometimes with Google, it's 1. Sometimes it's multi-part. Some other companies, you just don't know. Ask the interviewer, how many questions do we have and how much time do we have? because you can't even assume the whole interview time is for problem solving. Sometimes they allocate time for asking questions and so on. So how much time do you have? How many questions are you going to solve? And here's another trick. If you know you have like 2 questions or 3, you can ask the interviewer, can you show me all the questions? So I can maybe pick one. The worst thing they can say is no. And if they don't mind, that does at least 2 things. One, it gives you an idea of the questions you got to face, and you can have an idea of how much time you need, roughly. Again, if you've done a lot of practice, you probably are going to get good at knowing how much time you need to do things. The second thing is you can start with the easier one, the one that you're more likely to be able to solve, maybe because you've done something similar, or you just know that you can solve that kind of thing, and that's good for morale. Again, the worst thing you'll say is no. Obviously, the strategy doesn't apply to all types of interviews, but there's some cases where there's like maybe just 2 questions they want you to solve. Usually they start with the easier one, but sometimes they don't, right? But let's even dive deeper into this looking before you leap. So let's say it's a coding problem, you've read it, you kind of understand it. You're going to ask yourself, okay, and you've thought about multiple solutions. Maybe you have 2 solutions, equivalent runtime and space complexity. You can ask yourself, how much time will it actually take to implement either of these? Which one am I more confident I can implement in the time frame? Which one is simpler? Which one is easier to explain? Not just the logic and the approach, but even the runtime complexity and space. Because you want to be able to walk through the code and explain these things. So just looking before you leap definitely helps. Skeleton code, which we mentioned earlier, is also another way to do this. You have your skeleton, you have your approach settled, and you kind of see exactly what you're about to do, and then you dive in. As opposed to people who just start coding as they're thinking and then going back and forth, deleting things, editing things, adding things, and so on. That's so error prone. It's better you look before you leap, you know what you're about to do, and then you lock in and go in. It's quite time constrained. There's little room for recovery. So you want to minimize the chances of errors. And now for the last 3. We'll do them all in one go. So recall failure. So this is forgetting, not remembering, and not being able to apply what you've learned. Overconfidence, we'll come to that. And cowardice, fear. How is that relevant to, interview skills? Let's go. So for recall failure, that's just this idea of forgetting. Is very straightforward. The main problem is the strategy people use to learn, whether they're grinding leak code or whatever, doesn't have any incorporation or any guarantee or any technique that is aligned with how the brain decides what to retain and what to delete. So there's this thing called the forgetting curve. We have a video on this, but there are 2 powerful techniques: associative recall. And it's this idea of you're not memorizing, you're associating underlying concepts so you have a good understanding and you can apply your knowledge not only in scenarios you've seen before, but scenarios you haven't seen before. I have a video on this. I'll put a link in the description. And the second one is applying spaced repetition on these associations you've created. So this is not memorization. This is a neuroscience hack aligned with how the brain works. Overconfidence is just going your gut feeling and just being pretty much overconfident what it says. That's a circular definition, but everybody knows what this means. The best example I've seen is where people just think, I can do behavioral, I can just wing it, which is very problematic because behavioral is typically one of the rounds that determines how senior you are. So it actually has a good impact on your pay. Everybody's grinding leak code and can solve these technical problems to a large extent, but behavioral is really what makes that distinction. So that's where you can really stand out. So by just not ignoring and actually practicing, right, using the STAR approach for delivering and also getting good at selling yourself and aligning your stories in such a way that you're almost subliminally signaling to the interviewer that I'm a really good candidate, I'll really fit in your team, I'm a really good person you can hire. There's all these extra techniques you can use. It's not just using the STAR framework. And just simply just practicing this and rehearsing so you can nail it. That'll make such a huge difference, especially if you're going for senior roles. And just proving your readiness. So you can't just go based on gut feelings. Prove your readiness under realistic conditions, right? And then you can have the confidence, right, that you're actually ready before you go in. And the last one is cowardice. There's 2. The word cowardice kind of has this negative connotation. Maybe I should have called it fear as a sin. And it's just the fear of pushing back an interviewer. So if you can be an interviewer in an interview, and maybe the interviewer's accent is so thick, right? Push back. Tell them to enunciate clearly. Tell them you don't understand. What they're saying. You can't understand, and they will have to pause or slow down. And if their communication is so bad, they really shouldn't be interviewing. Now, maybe you should reschedule, honestly. And if they're disrupting your train of thought, push back. Politely tell them, can you give me one moment so I can just think, kind of thing. Do not let the interviewer ruin your interview. And the most powerful, if there's anything you take away from this video, I think I said that about the practicing on the realistic conditions. Maybe if there's a second one, the most powerful trick is this rescheduling. For some reason, people are afraid of rescheduling interviews that they have booked. Recruiters always like pushing them to, have this interview date locked in 2 weeks or something along those lines. And I understand it because the role can go to another candidate and it's quite competitive. But I just want to put this thought to you. We've talked about what it means to be interview ready, right? There's a minimum threshold actually. So it could be like you're 80% ready, but you've ticked all the boxes, but there's some things you still don't know. So your chances are still high, but not like, 90% or whatever. I'm not giving you a way to get those numbers, but I'm just giving you a sense of how ready you could be, right? If you meet the minimum thresholds, then fair enough, you could try an interview. But if you don't at least meet those minimum thresholds, so the checklist we've talked about, for example, then what's the point of going to the interview beyond, say, just going for the experience? If you actually want to take advantage of that opportunity, let's compare a scenario where you go in, you're not ready, it's very competitive. The most likely outcome is you don't get the offer because there's other candidates out there, right? So why not reschedule, right? Which gives you a better chance. In most cases, rescheduling works, at least for the fan companies. Let me be more specific. So with a company like Meta, for example, rescheduling works. They even let you do it automatically from the careers profile. It's just that if the date is getting so close to the interview, then you might have to reach out to a recruiter. But I've seen candidates reschedule on the day or the day before. I don't recommend that. But the idea is, in rescheduling, the worst thing is they'll say no, and then you just go ahead. But if they give you more time, you can use that to level up. Now you've seen the areas you need to level up on, so you know what to work on. Back to this list again, which I tried to simplify into roughly 8 deadly sins. I know I tucked in some other tips here and there. But it can feel overwhelming. It's like, how am I going to get good at all these things? Especially all the techniques. I said I was going to put links to resources that dive into the techniques to overcome the issues in the description of this video. But it's quite a lot. And we, on the Conditioning platform, have a service called Conditioning 360. It's pretty much hand-holding you throughout your interview loop. So you come in with some target companies. You come in, we do a thorough... Actually, let me do a demo. Let me show you a demo. This is the current state of the conditioning site, conditioning.com. It might look different when you come on it because we're always making changes. So I'm just going to scroll through loads of testimonials from people who've used us, but who've gotten into really good companies, Reddit, Meta, Amazon, Google, the lot. We have a range of solutions. The idea is it's a one-stop shop for all your interview prep needs. So it's like the go-to place for everything that you need, and it's customized to you. So you'd have your unique gaps and weaknesses, and we can help you diagnose them. We have diagnostic tests, diagnostic mock interviews as well. Diagnostic tests are free, so you can try it. We have mock interviews, AI mock interviewers, human mock interviewers, experienced, FANG plus engineers will help you. There's also coaching sessions. There's problem solving with an AI assistant, so it can help you spot bugs in your code, help you write things more concisely, and so on. Custom learning paths, and so on. I'm going to scroll way down. Essentially, in the coaching and mock interview offerings, we have 3 broad categories. Actually, it's 2. The 2 are I'll call it mix and match or self-service. So you come in, you want to do 2 mock interviews, or a mock interview in system design or coding or whatever domain for a certain target company. We'll arrange that for you. If you do more than 1, you get a discount. That's very simple. Or you want something more guided, you want hand holding. So maybe you have 1 or more target companies. Maybe you have Apple and you have Meta and you have these interviews coming up, for example. And you just want the hand holding throughout the process. Online assessment, phone screen, on-site, team matching, negotiation. We're with you throughout the journey with offline support, so you can always ask us questions that, the recruiter said this happened. When should I schedule my interview? Am I interview ready? And the way it works, you come in, the first session is diagnostic, and we prepare strategy custom to you, having understood your strengths, weaknesses, and timelines. Sometimes we tell people to reschedule, and we typically do that early on so you don't have to do a last minute rush. And we tailor coaching and mock sessions to your specific goals. So we talked about the deadly sins. We talked about those roughly 20, give or take, interviewing skills. Throughout this process, we assess you on all those things, give you all the tips and guidance you need to get there, and literally tick the box for you through the assessments. We'll know, okay, you've ticked this, you're fast enough now for meta, you're good at avoiding autopilot and all the other things. And we say, hey, you're interview ready, you have a 90 whatever percent chance of passing. And obviously we help you with company specific optimizations and so on. So there's a long list of things. Actually, for Codition 360, we actually have a 100% success rate so far. And you can click this button, you can view sample sessions, what these sessions might look like, and go through this list to see all the offerings. But there's a money back guarantee, and it's very rigorous. So definitely check it out. One more thing, there's a 30% off promo going on. So it's not going to last forever, but if you're interested in using any of the services in terms of mock interviews or coaching, try that code off for 30% off and check it out. If you got this far, thank you. I hope you found this useful and helpful, and you kind of have got an insight that'll help you level up your interview performance, your interview prep game. If you think there's something we missed, something you've discovered, something that we didn't capture, let us know. Put it in the comments. Let's start a discussion on that. If you think this was useful, hit the like button. It helps the algorithm, helps us grow. Definitely smash subscribe for more video. We're going to be doing more things on not just tech interview prep, coding system design and all these kind of things, like not just guidance and techniques, but we're going to solve some problems together and show you how things work. Talk about tech news. Is AI taking your job? What's the future of the industry? How should you pivot? Where should you be? Anything interesting or relevant that could help you. See you in the next video, and see the description for links to all the relevant resources. But definitely check out codishing.com